Catherine Whitmore had been sick for 3 years. At 28, she'd gone from running marathons and managing her family's charitable foundation to spending most days in bed. Exhausted by the simple act of existing, her father, James Whitmore, had spared no expense. The best specialists money could buy had examined his daughter. Neurologists at Johns Hopkins, rheumatologists at Mayo Clinic, infectious disease experts who'd flown in from Switzerland. Each visit cost more than most people made in a year, and each one ended the same way: inconclusive tests, apologetic shrugs, and suggestions to manage stress and consider therapy. Catherine had stopped counting after the 20th doctor. Now she sat in the waiting room of yet another medical center, this one specializing in rare autoimmune disorders. Her father paced by the windows, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with another team of specialists. Catherine's mother, Helen, flipped through a magazine she wasn't reading, her worry lines deepening by the month. Catherine closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to have energy, to wake up without the bone-deep fatigue that had become her constant companion. That's when she noticed the janitor. Marcus! Thompson moved through the medical center with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible. At 35, he'd been cleaning office buildings for 8 years, ever since his wife died and left him to raise their daughter Emma alone. He noticed things other people missed. It was part of the job. The small details that everyone else overlooked, the way light fell through windows at different times of day, the patterns in how people moved through spaces, the subtle changes in routine that might signal trouble. This morning, as he emptied wastebaskets in the waiting area, he noticed the young woman sitting by herself. She was expensively dressed but looked fragile, like something precious that was slowly breaking. Her parents hovered nearby, the father making calls, the mother wringing her hands. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the obvious wealth or worry. It was something smaller, something that reminded him of his daughter. The young woman kept touching her neck, just below her right ear. A tiny unconscious gesture, her fingers finding the same spot every few minutes, pressing gently then dropping away. She'd done it 17 times in the 20 minutes Marcus had been working in the area. He'd seen that gesture before. Emma had been 6 when she started getting sick. Fever that came and went, joint pain that made her cry at night, and that same unconscious touching always in the same spot on her neck. The pediatrician had called it growing pains, then maybe a virus, then perhaps stress from starting first grade. Marcus had felt helpless, watching his little girl suffer while doctors prescribed rest and patience. It was Emma's school nurse who'd finally seen what everyone else had missed. Mrs. Chen, a woman in her 60s who'd raised 5 children of her own, had taken one look at Emma during a particularly bad day and said, "Has anyone checked her for tick bites?" The doctors had looked everywhere else. They'd run blood tests and x-rays. They'd considered rare childhood diseases and psychological factors. But no one had thought to examine the small, dark spot behind Emma's right ear. A spot so tiny it looked like a freckle, Lyme disease. One round of antibiotics, and Emma was running around the playground again within weeks. That had been 3 years ago. Emma was 9 now, healthy and happy, with no memory of how sick she'd been. But Marcus remembered everything, including that small, instinctive gesture of touching the spot where the tick had been. Marcus finished emptying the wastebaskets and was heading to his supply closet when he heard the young woman's name. Called, "Catherine Whitmore? Dr. Rodriguez will see you now." Catherine stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. As she passed Marcus, he noticed her hand go to her neck again, that same unconscious touch, fingers finding that same spot. Marcus hesitated. He was a janitor. These were people who could buy and sell the building he worked in. But he thought about Emma, about all those months of watching her suffer while doctors looked everywhere except the most obvious place. He thought about Mrs. Chen, who'd cared enough to look past the expected answers. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly. Catherine turned, surprised. Her father stopped his phone conversation. Her mother looked up from her magazine. "I'm sorry to bother you," Marcus continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But I couldn't help noticing. You keep touching your neck. Has anyone checked you for tick bites?" The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine's father stepped forward, his face darkening. "Are you serious?" James Whitmore's voice could have frozen water. "My daughter has seen the best doctors in the country, specialists who've studied for decades, and you think they missed something as basic as a tick bite?" "Dad," Catherine said softly, her hand moving to her neck again. "Where exactly?" Marcus looked directly at her, ignoring her father's glare. "Behind your ear, right side, about an inch down from the earlobe. It might look like a small dark spot, easy to miss." Helen Whitmore was already reaching into her purse for a compact mirror. "Catherine, turn your head." "Let me look." "This is ridiculous," James muttered. But he moved closer as his wife angled the small mirror to catch the light. Helen's sharp intake of breath was audible throughout the waiting room. "James," she whispered, "there's something here. A small... It looks like a mole, but what?" Catherine's voice was tight with hope and fear. "But you've never had a mole there before." Dr. Rodriguez was a careful woman in her 50s who'd spent 20 years diagnosing difficult cases. When the Whitmores explained about the janitor's observation, she nodded thoughtfully rather than dismissively. "Lyme disease can be tricky," she said, examining the small dark spot with a magnifying glass, especially if it's been untreated for years. The symptoms can mimic dozens of other conditions. Chronic fatigue, joint pain, neurological issues. She looked up at Catherine. The standard blood tests can be unreliable, especially in chronic cases. But given your symptoms and this marking, I think we should run some specialized tests, the Western blot, and some newer PCR testing. Catherine felt tears starting. After 3 years of being told her symptoms were vague, stress-related, possibly psychological, a doctor was finally taking her seriously. "And if it is Lyme disease?" she asked. "Then we treat it. It won't be easy. Chronic Lyme can be stubborn, but it's treatable. You could get your life back." The tests took a week. When Dr. Rodriguez called with the results, Catherine was sitting in her childhood bedroom, staring out at the garden where she'd once spent hours but hadn't visited in months. The Western blot was positive, Dr. Rodriguez said, and the PCR confirmed it. "You have Lyme disease, Catherine. Likely contracted several years ago and left untreated." Catherine closed her eyes and felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. What now? "We start with IV antibiotics. It's going to be a long process, months of treatment. But I've seen patients recover completely from chronic Lyme. There's every reason to believe you can too." After hanging up, Catherine sat in the quiet of her room for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the medical center. "I need to speak with Marcus Thompson," she told the receptionist. "He's on the custodial staff." Marcus was waxing floors when they found him. The same receptionist who'd fielded Catherine's call seemed bemused by the request, but she delivered the message. Miss Whitmore wanted to speak with him. Marcus found Catherine waiting in the lobby with her parents. She looked different, brighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Marcus," she said, standing to greet him, "I wanted to thank you. The test came back positive for Lyme disease. You were right." James Whitmore stepped forward, and Marcus braced himself for another confrontation. Instead, the older man extended his hand. "I owe you an apology," James said simply, "and my gratitude. You saw what 20 specialists missed." "I just remembered my daughter going through something similar," Marcus replied, shaking the offered hand. "Sometimes the answers are simpler than we think." Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. "Tell me about your daughter. What's her name?" "Emma, she's 9 now. Loves soccer and reading and asking questions I can't answer." "I'd like to meet her sometime," Catherine said, "and I'd like to do something for you." "Both of you," Marcus shook his head. "That's not necessary. I'm just glad you're going to get better." "It is necessary," Catherine insisted. "Not because you expect anything, but because kindness should be recognized. Because paying attention matters. Because—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Because you saw me when I felt invisible." 6 months later, Emma Thompson was enrolled in the private school Catherine had attended as a child, her tuition fully covered by the Whitmore Foundation's newly established scholarship program for children of service workers. Catherine had recovered steadily. The IV antibiotics had been difficult, but each week brought more energy, clearer thinking, less pain. She was back to running, not marathons yet, but she could jog 3 miles without collapsing. She'd also started volunteering at a Lyme disease support group, sharing her story and advocating for better diagnostic protocols. The experience had taught her that money couldn't buy everything, but sometimes the most valuable insights came from the most unexpected places. Marcus still worked at the medical center, but now he also served on the foundation's scholarship committee, helping identify deserving families. He'd discovered he had a gift for seeing potential where others might see only circumstances. On a warm Saturday morning, Catherine and Emma sat together in the Whitmore garden, reading books about insects and disease vectors. Emma was fascinated by ticks, how something so small could cause such big problems. "But how did your daddy know what all those doctors didn't know?" Emma asked, looking up from her picture book. Catherine smiled, remembering that day in the waiting room when a janitor had paid attention to something everyone else had missed. "Because your daddy knows how to see," she said simply. "And sometimes that's the most important skill of all." That evening, as Marcus tucked Emma into bed in their new apartment, larger, safer, in a better neighborhood, she asked him a question that made him pause. "Daddy, are you still going to clean floors now that we have more money?" Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, thinking about the question. The Whitmores had offered him other opportunities, a position with their foundation, a chance to go back to school, options he'd never dreamed possible. "I like my job," he said finally. "I like helping people feel comfortable in clean, safe spaces. And I like being able to notice things. You never know when paying attention might help someone." Emma nodded seriously, like when you noticed Catherine touching her neck. Exactly like that. "So you're going to keep being a superhero janitor?" Marcus laughed and kissed his daughter's forehead. "I'm going to keep being someone who pays attention, and who remembers that sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest clues." As he turned off Emma's light, Marcus reflected on how a simple observation had changed multiple lives, not just Catherine's recovery, but Emma's educational opportunities, his own sense of purpose, and a wealthy family's understanding that wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes, he thought, the most important diagnoses happen not in examination rooms, but in the quiet moments when someone cares enough to really see what's in front of them. The next morning, as always, Marcus would arrive early at the medical center. He'd clean floors and empty wastebaskets and notice things. Because in a world full of specialists and experts, there was still room for someone who simply paid attention. And sometimes, that made all the difference.